Hi, everybody. It's so nice to connect with you from the US and share ideas. I'm a professor and author based at NYU. I'm also an occasional cartoonist and consultant. My focus in my work is global risk. What are the threats to our stability today, geopolitically, politically, economically, and socially, and how might those risks evolve in the future? I wanted to take this opportunity that we have to chat to share some insights based on my NYU work and my first book, Future World Order, about what the global risks are at the moment. But I also want to consider some more positive points as to how the post-pandemic era might surprise us and be better in some ways. And of course, I recognize that the pandemic is not over. I believe today there are over 1 million new cases, and until we have vaccine equality, the virus will still be with us. But given that so many countries have transitioned to loosening restrictions, I think it's time to reflect and imagine, how do we want our post-pandemic era to evolve? And of course, I'll give a little bit of consideration of what's happening in Ukraine and thinking of all of those refugees at the moment who are in a very difficult position. So first, let me talk about geopolitics. I think geopolitically speaking, we are in a leaderless world, and that has heightened global risk. Before the pandemic, there was significant speculation about who's in charge during the Trump years, of course, but even before that, in the last decade, we speculated whether it's a US-led world order still, whether it's a US versus China dynamic that's brewing, or could it be a multipolar system? During the pandemic period, I feel that it became even more clear that the post-Cold War era, driven by US-led multilateralism, had weakened significantly. We had many meetings with G7, G20, and other groups and other leading powers that tried to come together and unite against this common threat of COVID-19, but it really did not happen. It was quite disappointing to observe, and it really reminded us that we do exist in a leaderless world. What's interesting to note is that during this period of the pandemic, certain countries did engage in COVID diplomacy or COVID bilateralism by offering masks, vaccines, and there was a short period of time when it looked as though China had regained or gained this major role in the world due to its COVID diplomacy, but that has had mixed results as time has gone on. What's also interesting to note is that during the pandemic period, we did see a greater role for non-state actors, particularly activist billionaires who tried to fill the gap in leadership by focusing on the vaccine. For instance, Bill Gates, Elon Musk focused a little bit on providing ventilators. Adrian Chang, Jack Ma did a lot for distributing masks around the world. So already we saw, in the absence of leadership, we saw these other actors trying to fill the gap, whether it was China or whether it was these non-state actors. But what has been happening in the post-COVID, what is going to happen in the post-COVID era? I feel that, we can't really ignore what's happening in Ukraine. It shows, in a sense, that we do have a global community and we are united against a common enemy. We are anti-war. We've seen citizens around the world protesting against Putin's actions and in support of the Ukrainians. We've also seen most countries, and I think only 5 countries, in fact, abstained from the UN vote, but most countries have spoken out against Putin's actions, have provided military aid, humanitarian aid, particularly the US, the EU. And I think this is encouraging to have observed, and it's leading to this larger question: are we returning to this sense of a global community where we have shared global values and a greater appreciation for international norms and law? We'll have to keep track of this. Additionally, it's been positive to see, again, the world unite and offer their funds. Over I believe Ukraine has received over 50 million in cryptocurrency donations. That is really encouraging to see. And additionally, there's a lot of debate now about how this will impact energy, given the sanctions on Russia and potentially cutting off our ties to Russia in terms of oil and gas. Could this lead to a push towards more renewable energies longer term? That's the hope. But I think, and I hate to say it because I want us to all live in a better world where we're all united consistently on all issues, but I fear that there will be a sense of short-lived unity as we transition to other global challenges in the coming years in the post-pandemic era, and that we will again be reminded that this is a leaderless world, but one that is more dominated by great power competition. You could argue that what we're witnessing in Ukraine with Russia's position and invasion is effectively a larger battle between the US and Russia, or the West and Russia. There's speculation, of course, that could this lead to a larger war, World War III, God forbid, and a question mark, where will Putin go next? Will he invade other countries? And of course, we've seen the different levels of weapons that have been used by all sides: hybrid warfare, military warfare, economic warfare. Could this situation trigger more conflict in other parts of the world? Could other actors, whether they're rogue states or rogue actors, feel they can be more aggressive in this environment of a leaderless world which is driven by great power competition? I think that is the concern, and all of this obviously represents heightened global risk. Secondly, I would say there's been, in the last few years, from Trump through to the Biden era, a focus on US versus China competition. Beating China has been a clear priority for the US administration. President Biden has been very vocal about this, and we've seen the ongoing tech wars, past trade wars. That will be an ongoing trend. And lastly, in terms of great power competition in a leaderless world, we will likely see more competition between US versus China and Russia. China and Russia have formed a strong economic and military partnership before the Ukraine invasion. And there's growing concern that could we be observing an autocratic alliance that will be challenging US democracy and US leadership on a global stage in the post-pandemic era? Of course, with respect to Ukraine, China has not been openly supportive of Russia in terms of the invasion, but it has provided a financial lifeline as Russia tries to reorient itself and deal with the sanctions and the outflow of quite a bit of foreign investment. So this decade, this period of the post-pandemic era, we should expect more great power competition because it is a leaderless world. And I think more broadly, what will determine the leading power most likely will be AI. The country with the best AI, the country with the best AI weaponry, this decade will likely be the one that has determined the leading power. So we will see how that unfolds. So that is one of the key trends, I think, that will be with us in this post-pandemic era. Second, I want to talk about, well, us as citizens. What are we dealing with? The reality is, in the last decade, post-Arab Spring, there have been citizen protests against governments, against government policy, against certain leaders, and it's been a decade of severe citizen frustration, citizen protests, everything from protests against tax hikes in France to corruption in Bolivia, to major movements that brought corruption-related movements that brought down leadership in Brazil and South Korea. In the pandemic period, we also witnessed so many citizen protests against government policy relating to COVID measures. I fear that this will be one of the angriest years yet as we ease out of the pandemic and, of course, are dealing with the longer-term effects of the pandemic on our economies. If you throw in the larger trend of globalization versus populism that we're not clear on how that will evolve. Additionally, there's major concern about inflation, and this just this general level of frustration that is going to be exacerbated post-COVID and, of course, post-invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the economic effect that it'll have on oil prices and so forth. So we are dealing with more trends that will be negative for the average citizen in all countries, that will lead to this resurgence in anti-government sentiment and protest. What I would term a global spring, which relates to my my upcoming book. I'm not sure what the solution is for this, because it really the core of this issue is that we're not satisfied with our governments, and it has led to this larger question: is democracy the best system? Is it working in the way that it should to deal with so many 21st century challenges? And I really hope there's some improvement in this regard, but until our world leaders regain legitimacy in the eyes of our citizens, I think there should be an expectation of more unrest. I think right now the only real leader in the world is probably President Zelensky. The way he has handled the situation in Ukraine is really quite remarkable, and engaged with the world. We need more leaders like him. Lastly, I want to just touch on another global trend that has been with us for a while in terms of tech wars, conflict over technology. In the last few years, as you know, there's been so much concern about the AI competition between US and China. There's been so much concern about big tech versus government. Big tech has so much influence. There's such massive entities. We don't really regulate them. And I think that will continue. It's also playing out in terms of Ukraine. Some activists have challenged big tech companies for banning Russian state media on their platforms, and not doing the same with respect to hate speech or government-sponsored hate speech in other countries, whether it's Myanmar or in other countries which have significant conflict. So I think there's another layer of the tech war that is with us, with big tech, of course, versus government, but big tech versus civil society to a certain extent. I also want to highlight, in terms of tech wars, this growing trend we're seeing with decentralized web, decentralized currency, decentralized finance, which is all unregulated. And it does raise a larger issue if this could facilitate corruption, facilitate theft. Although we're seeing that crypto is positive in regards to what's happening in Ukraine. As I said, 50 million in crypto donations. That's remarkable to have observed. But the longer term effect of cryptocurrency on our global economy, it's not clear. The IMF has suggested that it is a significant, crypto does pose a significant threat. But I think that dialogue and that conflict will be ongoing. And the bottom line is, governments don't have the capacity to dictate what is evolving in the digital space, whether it's big tech or now the new wave of decentralized tech. And that is that will definitely be relevant in this post-pandemic era. I've been terribly negative, of course, in my comments, so I want to briefly touch on a few more positive trends that I hope we will see in the coming years in the post-pandemic period. We know that climate change is obviously high on our priority list, or should be. We hope our governments are going to make it a priority, how to target and tackle and adapt to the effects of climate change. I'm not sure I have full faith in government's ability to do this. And what's encouraging, however, is that we have seen so much effort or focus on climate tech. So entrepreneurs who are recognizing that they can move the needle and improve the situation by developing There are companies around climate tech and fighting different aspects of climate change, whether it's geoengineering food or figuring out ways to use technology to reduce carbon emissions and so forth. In fact, I was reading about this just yesterday. Climate tech investment has tripled in the last year and a half to 87 billion. That is a significant number and should encourage us to be more optimistic about the potential to adapt and hopefully reduce the effect of climate change on a global stage. Additionally, I want to suggest that satellite internet could be a game changer for us this decade. I'm sure you've read about it recently in the context of Ukraine, where Elon Musk, after having heard from, via tweet, heard from the foreign minister of Ukraine for support, for internet support, Elon Musk immediately sent his satellite internet Starlink infrastructure to Ukraine so that they can have uninterrupted internet access during this sensitive period of war. And the reality is, if Elon Musk, SpaceX, Starlink, or any other company has the ability to succeed in creating or giving the world internet access, that really could be a game changer in the coming years after the pandemic. It could be a game changer for education. More students could be educated in areas where previously they didn't have access. We will see more opportunity for employment with universal internet. And of course, you could argue that satellite internet, if it's giving every country access, could have a significant impact on democracy. It could create more opportunity for citizens to engage with government. It could reduce the possibility of governments clamping down on the internet and reduce that autocratic trend that has increased in the last few years. So this could be a positive. These two, climate tech and satellite internet, could be very positive for us in the post-pandemic era. Let's hope that these innovations take shape. I also want to suggest that with respect to our global economy, we all know what the problems are. You know, it's going to be, the post-pandemic era will be a struggle with inflation and all the other major issues, the ongoing global debt crisis, the effect of the Russia invasion. We have a lot that we will deal with. We need to boost the global economy. How do we do that? Well, obviously, there should be more women who are working. We should facilitate that as much as possible globally. There was a McKinsey study that famously said back in 2015, if we have more women in the workforce, we could add $12 trillion to the global economy. This was said back in 2015. Let's make it happen now. There's always been this phrase, the future is female, but let's make the future now and have women play a greater role going forward in the workforce and in finding solutions for all of these problems that we have. I also want to suggest that in a way to elevate the global economy would also be to put our focus on the blockchain. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers study from last year, focusing on the blockchain economy could add $1 trillion for us longer term. So we all know that this is the way things are evolving. So the sooner we accept this and put a focus on blockchain and all of its innovations, whether it's crypto, metaverse, and all the other ones that I'm still learning about, we will be in a better position to navigate a post-pandemic era and the negative economic effects of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Lastly, I want to suggest that I think I want to end on a positive note because we know what's at stake and we know what our challenges are. The truth is we have seen more than once that we do have a sense of a global community. Although we didn't unite against COVID in the way that we had hoped, during the pandemic, we did see that citizens around the world were against racism. They protested after the killing of George Floyd in the US. And that was that was positive to see that despite the pandemic, people were willing to come out on the streets and support and unite around a positive shared value. We're seeing the same thing with respect to Ukraine. People are responding around the world against war. And I think that is a spirit or a feeling or a value that I hope we really retain going forward in the post-pandemic era. And the truth is, it would be a mistake for us to simply look to our governments to solve so many of the global challenges that we have. We need to realize that we all have a role to play. In a sense, we are all activists now that need to solve or help solve so many of these global challenges that are going to be with us in the post-pandemic era. So let's get to work. Thank you for listening, and hope to connect with you online on LinkedIn, Instagram, and hope you will check out my book, Global Spring. Thank you.